I'm Tom Landon. Today we'll find out what it takes to unlock the secrets of evolution. Welcome to What It Takes. For most of us, our understanding of the subject of paleobiology may be limited to the Jurassic Park movies, unfortunately. But today, I'm pleased to welcome a true practitioner whose research and fieldwork recently resulted in being named a member of the National Academy of Sciences, which is one of the highest honors available to scientists today. The Academy is charged with providing independent, objective advice to the nation on matters related to science and technology, and members are renowned for being available as advisors to help our government make decisions on science. Shohei Zhao is a biology professor at Virginia Tech who has traveled the world to study the origins of life, and he's one of 3 faculty members from our local research university who've been honored with membership in the Academy this year. Dr. Zhao's work focuses on environmental changes and their impact on the evolution of species. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm so glad to have you here, and I'm going to offer a disclaimer at the beginning. I do this often when I'm talking to really smart people, is that, I'm a journalist, I'm not a scientist, so I'm really glad to have you here to help me understand some of these really important concepts that affect us all.
Yeah, I try.
Okay, yeah. Great. Before we talk about your work and your research and your work all over the world, I always like to start with, how did you get interested in what you're doing? Were you a young child who had a scientific mind?
Yeah, I grew up in a farm in a very rural area, and my parents were not very well educated. My mother was a farmer, and my father was a middle school teacher, so they didn't have much education. But I was very lucky that my parents valued education very much, so they worked really hard to try to get me to school. They didn't know much about science, and I didn't know much about science either, so I didn't have the opportunity really to be exposed to science. But since I grew up in a farm, I knew a few things about plants and animals, so I always wanted to be a biologist. But I ended up in paleobiology, so it's not so far away from biology, but that was an accident. But anyhow, once I get into college, I studied geology and biology, and I'm really interested in it. So it took many years to become a scientist.
Sure.
But I'm here, yeah.
And when you were, I don't know whether it would have been when you were in the equivalent of secondary school or college, was there one or more people who were really influential in steering? You say you didn't expect to go into the field you're in. At what point did you make that shift, and what was behind that?
Yeah, when we went to college, we didn't have the opportunity to choose what we study. I went to college in China, so we were basically told to study geology. And I was very lucky that this is a good match for me because of my experience in the farm and my interest in nature, so geology is a good match for me. Talking about influential teacher, I think perhaps 2 of the most influential teacher in my career development. One is my college professor. He really got me into early evolution of life, and later on my PhD advisor, who really taught me how to do science. So, to develop the interest first, and then someone teach you how to do it. So that's really critical.
And at what point did you come to the United States?
Yeah, I came to the U.S. in 1993 to pursue my PhD degree. So, yeah.
And that was at Tulane, is that, or?
No, I did my PhD at Harvard University in the biology department, actually.
Sure.
So, because I wanted to do biology, but I ended up doing geology in the college. So I finally, had a chance to work on my biology degree.
And so you've been, I think you were telling me how long you've been in Blacksburg, but remind me, what brought you to Virginia Tech?
Yeah, so Virginia Tech is really one of the best place to study geology. It has a great geology department, and the location, geologists, you want to be close to the rocks and the mountains, right? And we have the Region Valley with, Blue Ridge, with rocks nearby, and we have colleagues that are really nice and a wood expert in geology. So, before I came to Virginia Tech, I taught a few years at another institution. It's a great institution also, but it's far away from any rocks. So I really want to be close to rocks, and that's how I end up applying for the job at Virginia Tech when it's open.
And you like our rocks, our local rocks, but you have done a lot of traveling, right?
Yeah.
Your research takes you all over the world. Maybe let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, so a major part of my research is to travel and to look at rocks from different places. So I did field work in Siberia, in Yukon, Canada, in China, India, Namibia, Australia, and recently we're doing some field work in Mongolia. So there has been a lot of traveling. The reason we go to all these places is we are interested in a turning point in the Earth history that happened about 600 many years ago. And we want to develop a more complete picture, a global view of the Earth and life back 600 many years ago. So looking at the rocks at one place does not tell you the full picture, and you have to, just like today, you have to travel the entire globe to get a global picture, and we're doing the same thing for the Earth, 600 many years ago.
Take us back to what was the Earth like 600 million years ago?
Well, it's a good question. What was the Earth like 600 many years ago?
And,
right?
and I'm sure it varied based on where you were, right?
Yeah. Well, I can say that, in some aspects, it's quite similar to what it is today, but in many other aspects, they're quite different. First of all, there were no land plants, so totally different. The land would be, very different from what we have today. Animals is just about to start.
So animals are just about to start?
Yeah. So animals have just started to evolve about 600 many years ago.
What would qualify as an animal 600 million years ago?
Yeah, so an animal, we define an animal as organisms that have multi-cells, and they don't make their own food. They have to feed on other organisms. And many of them can move, not all of them. And in terms of genetics and the developmental biology, how we have embryonic development, all these things. There's a lot of things that go into the definition of animals. So looking at the very early evolutionary stage of an animal, it's so exciting to think about this. When animals just started, what it looked like. Do they have skeletons? Do they have bones? Do they move? How they move? What do they eat? Where do they live? All these questions, and many of them are still unanswered. We don't have an answer, but we just begin to learn more and more, year by year, about these early animals. Many of them probably didn't have skeletons to begin with.
Right.
So
they didn't need them, probably, right? Because we
that's
develop things as we need them, right?
Right. That's a great question, right? Why do we need bone? Why do we need a shell, right? Is it possible that the earliest animal didn't have bones and shells because they didn't need them? I think it's a very good possibility. Yeah.
One of the things that brought you to my attention when the folks at Virginia Tech, told me about this honor that you have with the Academy is that things always have to be simplified for me. So there's he's discovered, or his research is based on an organism that moved, the earliest organism that moved. Is that right? And what was it? How far did it move? And what does that tell you?
Yeah, I would say the earliest animals that learn how to move. Bacteria.
Not organism, right? Right,
Yeah,
sure. Thank
bacteria
you.
can move,
Right.
but they evolved their mobility many, many millions of years ago before animal did. So the first animals, what we discovered is that they didn't have bones, no shells. They're soft tissued organisms, but they were able to. Some of them able to move by 550 or even earlier, 550 many years ago or even earlier. And they left a little trail and a little burrows in the sediment. And we look at them, even though the organisms, the animals were not preserved, but we can still learn a lot about the behavior of the trace makers. How did they move? What kind of environment they lived? They lived on land, in the ocean, or in the lake. How much oxygen was available? What did they eat? Did they eat just microbial scum, or were they predators and around? So all these questions, it's fascinating to look at this.
The kind of thing that you're never going to answer all those questions you're not going to come
Right.
to the definitive answer, are you?
No, I don't think in my lifetime, but I think we are learning, each time we go into the field and we take rocks back and we learn quite a bit of new things about these and other fossils.
As a child growing up in Indiana where there's a lot of limestone,
Right.
we would go to a quarry and find, it's probably an unscientific name, but we called them the crinoids, the little ring fossils. And there's just something about fossils when you're a little kid, right? You've probably seen that, right? Where children are fascinated with dinosaur bones, but also with anything they can find that's a fossil.
Yeah, you mentioned those Indiana limestones. Really fascinating. It's loaded with fossil, like little Cheerios, and they are crinoid ossicles or pieces that have been used in construction. And I was not as lucky as you were. I didn't see my first fossil until I got into college. So I wasn't aware of the science of paleontology until I got into college. And actually in the second year of my college, I saw my first fossil. And like I said, I was really lucky that this field of study is really a good match for me. I like to do field work, and I like to do laboratory work. I like to think about things and how to interpret things and to understand how things were going in the past.
What's the, obviously a lot of the study of things where you're really looking at it in a microscope or some other way is done in a lab, and you've talked about the importance of doing both, but why do you even need to go to these places if the samples are there and people can get them for you? What is it that is better about going to Siberia?
Oh, the field work is so important that it cannot be replaced by anything, because you need to know the context, where the rock is from, and what is the rock above and below and nearby, right? Your fossils in the rock, and if you just isolate the rock, then you don't have the context. You don't have the bigger picture of where the organism lived and how this particular organism interacted with the other organisms, interacted with the environment. So we need to go to the field and to look at the rock by ourselves.
And now some of the places you're traveling, I mean, a lot of the places on your list,
Yeah.
Siberia, China, and I don't know the politics of Namibia, but some of these places, has your research been limited at all by geopolitics? Do you have any, is it difficult?
Yeah, some places are more challenging than others, both physically and politically.
Yeah,
So
how long does
we
it
have
take
to-
you to get to the location where you're researching in Siberia?
Oh, sometimes in Siberia it's very challenging because we had to travel to bigger cities and like Novosibirsk is a big city, and then we flew to Yakutsk, and then we flew to another very small city, and then we have to rent a helicopter that took us to the field, dropped us off, and then we write down little coordinates, the latitude and the longitude, and they give the piece of paper to the pilot, and they tell them, come back and pick us up on August the 15th. Sometimes they do come back on August 15th. Sometimes they come a day earlier, a day later. So yeah, so those are some of the more challenging field trips in terms of planning, in terms of the logistics, because once it involves helicopters.
Sure, it's not just about you being a very smart person. Clearly, you're a very smart person, but you have to be organized and logistically working as a team. Are there research assistants and students accompanying you on some of these trips?
Yeah, I took some of my students to the field, and then we got this as a part of the training, because when they become independent, they need to do the same thing, right? They need to find the money to support their research. They need to organize logistics, find the local contact, right, to help them, and all this on top of finding a big scientific question to answer.
Right, and it's what we learned in high school science, right? You get your hypothesis, you follow the scientific method, and then you reach a conclusion at the end, right?
Yeah.
I hated science fair because I didn't get it. I think when I was 15 years old, I just didn't, get it. But I mean, the work that you and other researchers do is really just science fair for a living, right?
Yeah, we do this for a living, and we're very grateful that we were able to do this, as our job, and because it's so enjoyable when let's say you spend 2 weeks out in Siberia, nowhere in Siberia, and you're cut off from the civilization, no worries about email and anything. There's no light there, so there's no electricity, so there's 24 hours of daylight there. So you can do whatever you want to do. So, but you're doing important thing in terms of science, right?
Yeah, and I contrast Siberia with, say, Namibia with the challenges.
Yeah, Siberia is freezing, Namibia is sweating, right? So it's very, very hot and dry. In terms of logistics, Namibia is not that difficult. Most people there speak English, many of them speak German. You can drive by yourself, so it's very open area, so it's easier in Namibia.
I know, what little I know, is that oxygen levels played, especially in what you're studying, but also have played a huge role in evolution and what is available, what can be alive at any given time, and how they evolve because of that, and just forgive me for my ignorance, but how are you measuring that, and then also talk about its oxygen's particular importance to life.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, oxygen is important to life, but also, oxygen is a consequence of biological evolution, because all the oxygen that we breathe in today were produced by organisms, by plants, by algae, and a group of bacteria, right? So before the origin of these oxygen-producing organisms, there was very little, virtually no dioxygen, O2, in the atmosphere. So the Earth's system is free of oxygen. Only starting about a little more than 2.5 billion years ago, then you begin to see signs of free oxygen in the rock record. And you can look at them by, for example, you can study minerals that would be very easily oxidized. There's a mineral called pyrite, or fool's gold. Today, if you have pyrite exposed on the surface, it's going to be oxidized in no time. But before 2.5 billion years ago, this pyrite is, they're being washed around, but they're not oxidized. So there must be a lack of oxygen. So using things like this, we can infer how much oxygen was available. And I think the consensus now is that starting about 2.5 billion years ago, there's a increase to appreciable amount of oxygen. And then maybe sometime about 400, 500 many years ago, there's another jump in O2, and that is very critical for animal evolution.
Sure. You've talked a little bit about how the intersection of geology and paleobiology, but also when you get stuck on something, or if there's something you don't know, or it's not something you've learned, or you're not the expert on it, how important is it to have other colleagues in other disciplines that you can communicate with to help you understand what you're trying to do?
Yeah. So one of the most important things that I learned from my PhD advisor is that scientific discoveries are mostly made at the boundaries between disciplines. And his lab is excellent in terms of bringing people from different fields. So we have graduate students, many of the graduates are doing paleontology, some of them doing geology, sedimentology, molecular biology. So we sort of have to talk to scientists from other fields. And I have been trying to maintain this sort of interdisciplinary research in my lab. So I regularly work with geochemists. I talk to molecular biologists. I also work with sedimentologists. So in order to bring the different talents together to solve a very complex scientific question.
You, like many Virginia Tech faculty who are doing a lot of research, you also teach some undergrad classes where you're interacting with kids right out of high school, right?
Yeah.
And what luck for them, but I know one of the courses you have taught in the past and you're not teaching now, but it's Earth and Life Through Time, and then I think Earth Dynamic Systems is something you're teaching now. How important is that contact with these 18, 19-year-olds for you? Like, what does it mean to you to be able to still interact with these kids who are maybe not even looking to be into science?
Yeah, I was very excited to teach the students because many of them are actually very, very enthusiastic about geology and biology. So I'm teaching Earth Dynamic System with another professor at Virginia Tech. This is a course that is designed for our first year geology major. We have about 50 students in the class. We take them to the field and expose them to the most fundamental thinking of geology. I'm very excited to work with the students because I think they all have great potential to become scientists. And I think the most important thing I try to teach them is to teach them how to think like a geologist, how to think like a scientist. This is more important, like giving them the knowledge. Rather, we would like to teach them how scientists learned this knowledge, why they think this must be the case when they look at the rock. So to think like a geologist, and that's more important than how old is the first animals.
Sure. We still have a few minutes left. Are there things, I'm an educator as well, are there things that you wish public schools or schools in general, like things you wish your kids came in knowing when they arrive? Are there things that you think are gaps in our education system for kids?
Yeah, I think our group of students are really very trained in high school, most of them. And if there's any gap, I think, and we're trying to make up this in college, and that's quantitative skills. That's something I think is becoming more and more important in modern day science, how to quantify things. This is just a skill. I think with computers, this can be somewhat mitigated as long as you know how the system works.
Where did that answer come from? Right, exactly. What does it mean? Well, you haven't talked about the National Academy of Sciences, and I know this is a huge deal for the university and also for you professionally. What does it mean to be recognized and welcomed in membership in the National Academy?
Well, this is such an incredible recognition that came to me really is a total surprise. I've never anticipated that become a member of the National Academy of Sciences. But it's a great honor. I'm really grateful to my colleagues, to the scientists who nominated me and selected me as a member of the Academy. I don't think it would change my life in any significant way. I still love to do my science, love to travel and to do my research, but it's really, it gives me more motivation to work with my students, graduate students, postdocs, and to teach the next generation of STEM workforce.
And we're almost out of time, but I assume it also won't hurt you when you go looking for funding for future projects, right?
Yeah. This is a major part of our job, right? To support our science, to support our students also. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming. As we close the program, I'd just like to congratulate my guest again for being named to the National Academy of Sciences, for helping us and for helping me understand the importance of field research about the past to help us plan for the future. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.